What's up, guys? In this video I'm going to give you some tips and tricks about cleaning out the radiator on the Pioneer 1000 and just cleaning it in general, and also some places you should add some additional drain points to help the mud not collect in the first place. But before we get into that, here's some cool footage of two XMR Outlander 1000s in the bounty hole mud the weekend after the bounty hole, but just some random ATV footage I got while riding dirt bikes out there of some super cool Mud Puppy subscribers. Those tires are super badass in this black mud, those LL2s. They clean out so fast. So we're tearing down the Pioneer a bit in order to clean some things. The bounty hole was really rough on stuff and everything is just caked with this nasty black mud. So tearing it down to see where the mud collected, to see how we can prevent that in the future. We'll show you some of that in a minute. But primarily we need to clean the radiator. The radiator is so packed that no air is flowing through a lot of it. And it finally got bad enough to overheat a little bit. So it's 80% clogged. So Honda, you did a good job with the cooling system on the Pioneer. I'm happy with it. This is the first time I've had to clean it since I've owned it, and it's just now overheated in thick sugar sand looking like that. So big cooling system improvements on this 2022. Now, how do you clean the radiator? This screen right here makes it really hard to clean. So this screen I'm holding is actually from up in here. It tucks up in there like that. To get it out, you pull out these two 10mm bolts, and then you got 5 pop rivets. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Once you get those out, this drops out pretty easy. It'd be nice to get this thing off, but unfortunately, there's 2 pop rivets for it that are way up in here, and pretty hard to get to. But with just that out, you can do a pretty good job cleaning your radiator. Front bumper comes off super easy. 2 12mm bolts there, 1 14 there on both sides. You can leave your winch in place if you have this kind of winch mount that ties into the front differential bracket. So that's all easy. I wish that Honda would have made this thing like the Polaris, where you have 2 little buttons you flip and the grate pops out. That's getting more and more common, but this doesn't have it. That'd make it a lot easier to clean this radiator. So the way to clean this first is to back flush it, to get as much of the stuff you can to come forward. So get back behind there with a garden sprayer, push it as much of it forward as you can, and then just take a lot of time soaking it until you can see through every single one of those veins. All right, so just rinse the radiator for the first time, just with the water hose from the back as much as I could, and then I went, kind of with the veins and rinsed it all out. That black mud isn't that bad. You can see that there's a huge improvement. Most of it's actually out. It probably wouldn't even overheat right now. There's a few areas like right in here, you can see where it's still blocked up pretty good. But this is nowhere near as bad as clay for getting caked up. Also, it helps to go in here and pull out stuff like this that's stuck in the radiator, because dirt's just gonna stick to that later. The reason you can see through it though is I rinsed it real good with the water hose and I blew it out with the blower. You can use compressed air too. Just be careful not to bend your veins. And now I'm going to soak it with Purple Power. If you leave it saturated with water where all the veins are full and hit with Purple Power, it doesn't work as good. So I like to blow it out, saturate it with Purple Power, let it sit for a couple minutes, and then rinse it again. I think if I do that a few times, it'll be done. This area right here, the second battery box area, is totally full of mud, and you can see that's not draining. So I need to get it drained, obviously, and then I'm going to drill a bunch of holes in that. So that's another area that you really need to improve the drainage. This other stuff didn't hold that much mud, but man, this right here is holding, I don't know, 20 pounds of water right now. So all right, so that's straight Purple Power out of a pump sprayer on there. You can see it's really melting that dirt off. It looked pretty clean, but there's a lot of dirt that's just dripping out of it down onto the diff and the winch and stuff. So it's also important to clean the sides of your radiator too. Every part of your radiator helps with heat transfer, right? So even if those end caps are caked, clean them, because that'll help dissipate some heat. Anything you can keep clean, like a metal like that, any of the piping and stuff, that's gonna help it cool down. And once you start going in mud, you need all the cooling you can get. But yeah, Pro Power is some badass shit right there. So let's go ahead and rinse it. I had it on there for 2 minutes. When you do straight Pro Power, you don't want to do it much longer than 2 minutes. It'll start to corrode stuff and oxidize stuff. We start at the bottom. Oh yeah. You thought it was clean before, but look how dirty that water coming out of there is. Some people say to use stove cleaner or some of them like more harsh cleaners like that. I've never found a need to do that. Purple Power's always done the trick for me. This little bottom one right here is when you really got to get good. Yeah, so even with this little front grate in here, it's a little annoying to clean it, but I think it's doable. Too much work to remove this guy, unfortunately. Oh yeah. All right, there's how it looks after the first Purple Power rinse. It's really 99% of the way there. Again, just depends on the type of mud you're riding in. The worst part for me is pulling out these little pieces of grass. But I'm gonna do it one more time. There's a couple areas that are still a little stained, but there's really good airflow through all of it now. So that was pretty easy to clean out. It's just disgusting everywhere. The problem with all these areas that hold a lot of mud is it weighs the machine down, which puts more stress on everything, reduces your ground clearance, makes it slower, etc. So one thing, for instance, this area right here is a big open kind of storage area. Well, it has this trash can, I call it, sitting in there, which is great. The Luxmon gets this trash can. This only has one little drain from the factory. I drilled a few more. This thing needs a bunch more drains. I'm gonna turn it into literal Swiss cheese. And the doors are actually a pretty big problem too. Where these holes are here, everything beneath those two holes is full of mud. You can actually see it in there. So the holes, doors need a bunch of holes drilled in the bottom too, so they can clean out. The way to fix this is just get you a 1-inch hole saw on the drill and drill a bunch of 1-inch holes, so that, yeah, you're gonna get full of mud. When you go through some water, it can rinse itself out, basically. You just wanna make sure everything can drain. I did pull the seat off. This is the upper part of the seat. There's just 5 10mm bolts, pretty easy. The lower part of the seat, that thing weighs like 70 pounds. It did okay drying out with water, but once it's saturated with mud, it's not a great foam. It's gonna be heavy, just like all the ATV seats too. Not sure what you can really do about that. I am gonna pull this cover across here and all these engine cowl covers back here, just to give the engine a good look over and clean everything real good, because I haven't done that in a while. It is a good bit of work to pull all these covers. Like this right here, from here to here is all one piece of plastic. All right, so as I suspected, the bottom of the doors were totally full of mud and sand. So I drilled a hole there, and I also drilled a 1-inch hole in the bottom of the door. So that'll keep it from getting in there, and also you can just take the water hose, stick it up in there, and flush it out now. Did that on both sides. They're both pretty thoroughly packed with sand. It's basically like drilling through sand. Pretty funny. So these engine guards are held in with 10,000 push pins, and you're probably wondering why. It's because there was a huge amount of complaints about the heat toasting you on the previous models, so Honda went crazy on 2022 and made them very steam heat proof. That cylinder head, that camshaft's really close to your butt if you're sitting in the center. That's the first time I've had this guard off, so there is a ton of mud sitting in here. Let me demonstrate for you. Oh yeah. So that's got to get some more holes drilled in it. I don't want to mess with this area too much though, because again, I don't want to cause any heat issues. So there's the Pioneer airbox. That's where your snorkel pipe comes up from down here. And you can see that the airbox is kind of tiny, and so are those intake runners. That's the reason this makes less power than the Talon. Because the engine is under your butt instead of behind you, there's just not as much room to have a high flow intake system. So it comes all the way down here, up into the airbox, down into the engine. So not nearly as high flow. But we did find a lot of mud there. And then this back little cowl, this one right here, sits up on top of the airbox. It is totally packed with mud all in here. There's a good 10 pounds of mud. That's not a seal, guys. That's all mud. So that's a good thing to check too. That one comes off pretty easy. I'm gonna rinse this a little bit because it's just hard to work on. It's so muddy, and then I'm gonna pull this back cowl off. And I think I'm gonna stop there. I think that'll let me clean everything I want. But it is cool to see this part of the engine. I never had it apart this far, and I'll be able to clean the engine really nicely too. This wasn't too bad to pull, so if you hydrolock your motor or whatever, take off the 2 seats and then pull these pins here, and you can get to the spark plug really easy right there. Also, there are a couple pins that come this way. Not here, actually on this side. There's 2 pins that come from the back that hold that housing on. One's right there, and the other one goes on this cover. So the way to do this is to take this back cover off first, this top cover off first, and then you can access those pins. That's how I did it. While I'm in here, I'm gonna check the torque on all these clamps. The talons have had some issues with that, but so far it's been a very waterproof setup, and boy has it seen some water. I got the plastics off. This back kind of U-shaped cover has a couple bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're little hex bolts like this. And you take that off and you got access to everything. So there's your clutch, there's your oil tank. You see it's all pretty nasty looking. That's the one area that gets cleaned when I spray propel back here, so it looks better, but this all needs to be cleaned up a lot. So we'll do before and after. I drilled a hole here, because that was just completely full of mud. You can see that there's actually still some crap down there. And then I drilled a hole in the glove box, a nice big hole, because that always fills with water, and I keep a waterproof box in there anyways. And then a hole up here. So if you put all those drain points, this thing should be a lot less annoying about collecting tons and tons of mud everywhere. All right, so I think it cleaned up okay. Definitely looks a whole hell of a lot better. This side looks about brand new somehow. The subtrans and the engine cylinder head cleaned up really well. So it's because there's no exhaust heat up here baking it on. So yeah, it's clean. Time to put all these plastics back together with all 2,000 snap pins. I do love the engine layout of this thing. I think it is the best driveline setup by far, the Talons and the Pioneer. You know, no U-joints going to the rear. That's awesome. Engine's very mounted down low, good for center of gravity. It's mounted far forward, which is good for weight distribution. The sub transmission is in front of the engine, which is also great for weight distribution. Very solid setup. Really think for 99% of people, this is the side-by-side you need. It might not be the one you want. It's not the fastest. It's not the loudest. It's not the best looking. Doesn't have the best fit and finish or comfort, but it is an excellent layout, and it's extremely capable and practical and reliable. All right, so the Pioneer's all clean. Let me show you all the holes I drilled to help drainage. Cup holders, drilled a big hole in the bottom of there. Drilled a big hole in the bottom of there. Be careful, there's some wires behind there. Fun fact, almost hit those. There's a bunch of holes in this box. You can see one there. There's like 6. Drilled a big hole there, big hole there, big hole there. And these seat drainage, those can drain better. It's sitting about an inch higher now that I cleaned it because it was so caked with mud, and the radiator is much lighter and more high flow and happy. This seat is the one thing that's kind of disappointing me. It is crazy heavy, and now that it's saturated with mud and not just water, it doesn't seem to want to drain. I used to just take it and stand it up in the garage and let it drain out. It's staying pretty caked up, so to figure that one out. But so far so good.